Reason, translated by Max Muller, 1881 edition, Part 2, Transcendental Logic, page 66. General logic resolves the whole formal action of understanding and reason into its elements and exhibits them as principles for all logical criticism of our knowledge. So, general logic has rules to critique the knowledge that we already have. So this part of logic may therefore be called analytic. So general logic is analytic in nature because it helps us to logically critique or examine the kind of knowledge that we have about the physical world, and is at least a negative test of truth because all knowledge must first be examined and estimated so far as its form is concerned according to these rules before it is itself tested according to its contents in order to see whether it contains positive truth with regard to its object. So he says general logic, which is analytic in nature, helps us in examining and estimating the knowledge that we have, and it pertains to the formal element of knowledge. But he says for general logic to have a certain element of truth, it has to be tested. Knowledge has to be tested for its contents. But general logic does not enable us to test the knowledge that we already have. So, an example of general logic is this equation a plus b is equal to b plus a plus b is equal to b plus a is a purely logical proposition. It's a purely logical equation, but Kant says that it does not have a positive truth unless it is tested in the physical world, unless it is tested on its objects. So we can assume that a plus b is equal to b plus a because of its logical nature. But he says for a plus b is equal to b plus a to be absolutely true and to have an element of truth, this kind of knowledge has to be tested. We will have to apply certain values to this equation and test it for its truthness. So, but as the mere form of knowledge, however much it may be in agreement with the logical laws, is far from being sufficient to establish the material or objective truth of our knowledge. No one can venture with logic alone to judge of objects or to make any assertion without having first collected, apart from logic, trustworthy information in order afterwards to attempt its application and connection in a coherent whole according to logical laws, or still better, merely to test it by them. So he says merely logical statements like a plus b is equal to b plus a does not establish any material or objective truth of our knowledge. Nonetheless, this kind of logical arrangement is needed for us to apply and connect this knowledge that we have about the nature of the real world to objects in the real world. So, however, there is something so tempting in this specious art of giving to all our knowledge the form of the understanding, though being utterly ignorant as to the contents thereof, that general logic, which is meant to be a mere canon of criticism, has been employed as if it were an organum for the real production of at least the semblance of objective assertions, or more truly, has been misemployed for that purpose. This general logic, which assumes the semblance of an organum, is called dialectic. So he says that when we concern ourselves with the pure form of understanding, that is, when we concern ourselves with general logic alone, and when we assume that general logic is enough for us to establish objective assertions, then general logic starts to resemble an organum or an instrument for truth or for finding objective assertions about the nature of the world. Then general logic becomes dialectic in nature. Different as are the significations in which the ancients used this name of a science or art, it is easy to gather from its actual employment that with them it was nothing but a logic of semblance. So he says general logic, which is not tested, general logic, knowledge in the form of general logic, which is not tested, has been used by ancients in the name of science, but he thinks logic is a mere semblance. It does not lead us to any concrete or material or objective assertions about the nature of the world, because logic has to be tested for it to be true. So it was a sophisticated art of giving to one's ignorance, nay, to one's intentional casuistry, the outward appearance of truth by imitating the accurate method which logic always requires, and by using its topic as a cloak for every empty assertion. So he says people have used logic as an outward appearance of truth because logic has rules. So people have been misled to believe that logic is truth. So Kant says logic does not lead us to any concrete assertions or objective propositions about the nature of the world. Now it may be taken as a sure and very useful warning that general logic, if treated as an organum, is always an elusive logic that is dialectical. For as logic teaches nothing with regard to the contents of knowledge, but lays down the formal conditions only of an agreement with the understanding, which so far as the objects are concerned are totally indifferent, any attempt at using it as an organum in order to extend and enlarge our knowledge, at least in appearance, can end in nothing but mere talk, by asserting with a certain plausibility anything one likes, or if one likes, denying it. So he says logic, general logic, is like the knowledge that we already have about the nature of the world, but it is misleading to believe that such knowledge can allow us to use it as an instrument to extend and enlarge our knowledge about the nature of the world. So he says general logic cannot give us any kind of idea of new knowledge. It cannot help us extend our knowledge, although it has rules that connects our knowledge about the nature of different objects that we see in front of us. So he says such instruction is quite beneath the dignity of philosophy. So he says people who believe that logic is a sufficient condition for truth are doing philosophy which is beneath the dignity of philosophy. People who think that general logic or the logical arrangement of our knowledge is enough for us to arrive at truth are misled. So therefore, the title of dialectic has rather been added to logic as a critique of dialectic semblance, and it is in that sense that we also use it. So he says, when general logic is assumed to resemble truth, then it becomes dialectic in nature, because general logic has an unfinished element to it, in the sense that it has not been utilized to test for its contents. So he says logic is dialectical in nature because it is untested knowledge. It is not truth, and it is wrong to assume that mere logical connections between knowledge about the nature of the world can lead us to truth.